We're going to talk about Nasir Jones. In the last, I want to say the last decade on into this one, Nas has had an incredible run. Really, in my opinion, starting with Life is Good. There may have been a snag food with the really, to be honest with you, I would take it back to the last decade. I thought Distant Relatives was a classic. That he followed up was Life is Good. The Kanye West album had some mixed reviews that he did. It was a short one. But after that, you go on three King's Diseases and three Magic albums. And not everybody liked every single one, but the work and the output that he's put out, the lyrical supremacy that he's expressed, has Nas battled himself into the GOAT conversation. A lot of people over the last 6 or 7 years have told me that it's Jay-Z, I should just accept it, that they're tired of people saying that anybody other than Jay-Z is the greatest of all time. Me and Slankster had a conversation the other day about whether or not Nas was there and some of the other people that were in that conversation. And one of the people he brings up all the time is William Griffith III, Rakim Allah. And we had that discussion as well as to whether or not Nas was better than Rakim, whether he was better than KRS-One, better than Biggie. Has he moved ahead of all of the greats of the past and battled his way beyond Jay-Z or any other body else's opinion to be the #1 greatest rapper of all time? Or does he just sit at the table? What do you think? Skills Mega, I'll let you go first.
All right. First off, I think that Nas was already in the GOAT conversation before his new 2 series. I thought that he cemented that a long time ago. How many people really wanted it with Jay-Z at that time? And that happened at the detriment of New York hip-hop. You know what I mean? When New York was fighting each other, the South banded together and came up, and it's been hell ever since. But like, I feel like this for real. I think that Nas was already in that conversation. Mm-hmm. I think with songs like Rewind, which is one of the best storytelling songs in hip-hop history, also just the impact. A lot of people weren't rhyming how Nas was rhyming and weren't rhyming with the seriousness that Nas was rapping with. Like, Nas had funny punchlines and things of that nature also, but like Common, for example, there's a big difference between Common on Can I Borrow a Dollar to Resurrection. And that main difference to me is the influence of Illmatic. And a lot of people switched their style up after Illmatic came out. So if Illmatic doesn't happen, a lot of other things don't happen. Like when Nas said on Ether, name a rapper that I am influenced, like that wasn't just a bar that he threw out there. That was a very factual thing, in my opinion. So as far as him recently being crowned, I think that there is no #1 definitive GOAT, but I think there's a Mount Rushmore. And I think that they're honorable mentions because in 50 years, it's hard to just say 4 people. But I think that from a commercial standpoint and a impact standpoint, you could put Jay-Z up there. But as far as actual rhyming ability, I don't think that you can clearly put him over Nas, especially when Nas won the battle, but he didn't win the war. You feel me? Because it's like you ethed him, and that becomes a term within hip hop and outside of hip hop for when somebody gets, put in their place. But it's like you then signed to him. So it's like Nas won the battle, but he didn't win the war. New York lost in the end as a result of that, like I said earlier. But I just think that his longevity is incredible. We've seen longevity before. Like LL was in the game, 30-something years before he started to mainly focus on acting, right?
Right.
But LL didn't maintain that respect lyrically that Nas did, and Nas doesn't have a cannabis incident. So
the incident.
Yeah, what I mean?
So I mean, good point. I mean, it's like he's talked about Nas basically with Illmatic having the Rakim effect of paid in full, and also Nas did have a trip up with the cannabis incident like LL Cool J had. And he eated Jay-Z as well. What do you think? Is Nas sitting at the table of the GOAT discussion? Should we just accept Nas as #1? How would you rebut that? This is not a Nas versus Jay-Z thing per se. Right. That's another show. But what has Nas's impact over the last 10 years been?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I could rebut that because I largely agree. I think that in the last decade, and even before that, unquestionably, Nas has already been in the top 5 dead or alive conversation. So whether you wanna, also term that as the GOAT conversation, then I agree. I think with not only the last decade, but I think really primarily the last 5 years, really, with those two trilogies. Like, to me, though, he arguably put out 6 classics in less than 4 years. And so that put him, to me, in the top 2 or 3 discussion, like beyond just the top 5. I guess you could say the upper room of the GOAT discussion.
The upper room.
And I would say too, because when you look at Nas's longevity, his influence, his impact, as well as, even mass appeal, like all of those statistics combined, I don't think there's any way you could have kept him out of the top 5 discussion. And now, to me, I don't see how you could keep him out of the top 2 or 3 conversation. It's funny you mentioned, like, a cannabis incident. What's really interesting and telling is that what Nas could have had was a Jay-Z incident, but instead he flipped the table and turned the Jay-Z incident into an Etherine. And I've always argued that you could never put Jay-Z above Nas because there are always going to be trace amounts of ether in Jay-Z's soul. Like, that's just how impactful that
made his soul burn slow now, man.
That body blow to him was. I remember the day Ether dropped. Like, it is a moment in not just hip hop history, but in my personal hip hop history. Because me and my cousin was back when the X was still on in Baltimore on the radio, and they played that joint before 92Q, and we was ready with the tape deck, like, here we go. And it was verses to a different diss track Nas did about Jay-Z and a couple other people, because he was going at a few people at the time. And it was verses to a completely different song called Everybody that had dropped on some of the hip hop boards back in the days of hip hop battle boards. And somebody had leaked these verses. So we were like, we already know what's going to happen. And we thinking we going to hear this song. And then Ether comes on and just like blows everything out the water. We was like, this, what are these for? Like, we was bugging. We recorded it and then we listened to it like 70 times straight.
That was one of the points before Ether. People thought Nas wasn't going to turn out to be what he was supposed to be, what he started to be. Because you remember he had before the Stillmatic album, he had a song called Stillmatic that came out on 88.9, H to the Izzo, M to the Izzo, some rap version of Cisco.
Crying everybody.
Like, but it wasn't Takeover. It wasn't what Jay-Z did, but
to me, I was already debating that Stillmatic freestyle was still lyrically better than Takeover. Takeover had people,
but it's always comes down to what's a better.
So then I was like, yo, he's gonna shut this down, and sure enough, he went beyond what I thought.
So I can't disagree with what either one of you are saying. I always thought Nas was in the conversation. He was always.
Real quick though, another thing I would say though to one of Skill's points is that it's interesting. Excuse me, what you said about him winning the battle but not the war. I think that's really an interesting take because of him eventually signing to Roc Nation under Jay-Z. So I mean, I kind of agree, but I also would say I don't think that necessarily anyone won the war. Like you said, all the New York hip hop both won for the culture but lost at the same time in terms of like how they could have been united. And when they did unite, it was kind of like after all of that. But it still led to that, and I think it's really interesting that I would say no one won the war. I would say it ended in a ceasefire. But when
after Nas beat Jay-Z on Ether,
Nas beat him in terms of like the head.
After he beat Jay-Z, there was no reason to continue it going. Once they squashed it, then Jay-Z found a way for.
I mean, he tried with Super Ugly, and Super Ugly was.
But Jay-Z found a way that maybe they both could make money together. I don't think that's a bad thing. It's kind of like when Bernard Hopkins beat Oscar De La Hoya. De La Hoya didn't keep a beef going. He decided to ask Bernard Hopkins to join Golden Boy Productions, Golden Boy Promotions, and they made money together and been doing it ever since. So I don't necessarily think that's a loss for Nas or
that's why I say I don't think anyone won the war, but they both benefited in a ceasefire. Because ironically, the I Declare War concert where they publicly squashed it and came together ended up being something that projected that created a further projection for.
And no one else had to die in hip hop. I mean, that was a good thing. It didn't.
Imagine if Tupac had done something similar, like how much that would have benefited the.
I think he would have had he been given a chance to live longer. But now we're finding out that Puffy was like, no.
Exactly. Let's not jump too far into that rabbit hole, but yeah.
I'm going to say this though. I don't think that Nas's last 6 records were arguably classics. I think the word classic is thrown around too easily. I think most of them were very good.
Like
they were very
KD1.
good albums. What'd you say?
I didn't like the first King's Disease.
KD1, I don't know. Magic 2, I didn't really like that much. The other ones were good. Magic 1 was the one that sticks with me that I continue to listen to over and over again. So that must be great to me. But some of the other ones, they had great records on there. I wouldn't call them a classic, but they were good pieces of art. His rhyming ability maintained a level of greatness on those, but I wouldn't call those records classics per se.
I mean, that's why I say arguably. I don't necessarily disagree. I think it depends on who you ask. Like my favorites are Magic 1 and KD 3. And I think my least favorites are Magic 2 and KD 1. Like KD 1, I really appreciate it for what it did at the moment. But I like KD 2 and 3 way better, even though KD 1 won the Grammy. But I think that too is very telling to the overall hip hop culture at the moment in the mainstream. Like if you listen to KD 1, it had records on it that did appeal more to radio play and more to Hit Boys audience. And I think that was brilliant because that way they kicked the door in getting the Grammy, and then the next 5 albums they could do whatever the hell they wanted. So